Hi, my name is Manish Gupta, and in this video, I'm going to talk about OpenAI's O1 model. So, what is O1 and how does it perform on maths, science, and coding benchmarks? Right. So, O1 is a model from OpenAI which produces a pretty long internal chain of thought before responding to the user. So in fact, in its preview version, OpenAI has started hiding the chain of thought and only providing a summary of that chain of thought. OpenAI has not released O1, but has released O1 Preview, which is an early version of O1. In fact, OpenAI has also released O1 Mini, which is a faster version of O1 Preview, which is effective at coding. Uh, so the architectural details of this model are not publicly open, but what OpenAI says is that it has used reinforcement learning to teach the model how to think productively using its chain of thought reasoning in a highly data efficient training process. So although they have not very explicitly mentioned anywhere any details about this process, but I sort of feel that they've done reinforcement learning to make the model think better. So reinforcement learning on chain of thought reasoning rather than just on the output, right? So open performance, what they've also observed is that the model's performance basically improves with more RL as well as with more time spent thinking. So more RL basically means more of train time compute, more reinforcement learning means more train time compute, and more time spent thinking basically means generating longer chain of thought sequences, which is test time compute. Okay. Now, why is O1 so important? O1 is very important because, OpenAI already had this GPT-4o model, which was really awesome. But O1 sort of is way better compared to GPT-4o model. Right? So they measured it on 3 different benchmark datasets. These benchmark datasets are still considered very hard compared to other datasets like GSA, MATK, and so on, which have become sort of old and saturated in some ways. Okay. So they computed accuracy of O1 or compared O1 with GPT-4o on competition math, which is AIME dataset. This dataset is basically about US Math Olympiad. They also compared with competition code, essentially programming problems, Codeforces dataset, and then also GPQA Diamond dataset, which is PhD level science questions in physics, biology, and chemistry. Okay. So what they observed, of course, higher the better. So the accuracy percentile, higher the better. And they've compared with GPT-4o and O1 preview. You observe that GPT-O1, right, essentially gives you 83.3 on AIME, so the solid bar here basically means if you just give one chance for it to give the answer versus the shaded ones essentially are on top of the solid ones. Basically, it means that you give 64 chances and then you can select based on a consensus of 64 samples from the model. Okay, so of course consensus leads to better accuracy, and what you observe is that competition math, basically the model is able to score 83.3 points in terms of accuracy, which places it in the top 500 students in the US in this US Math Olympiad qualifier exam called AIME. Okay. On Codeforces, it basically is able to obtain 89 percentile. Essentially, on PhD level math problems, it's basically able to score 78 as an accuracy, which essentially which sort of exceeds an expert human accuracy. So it's basically better than a expert human PhD essentially in solving these physics, biology, and chemistry problems. Okay. Now, if you also compare with other kinds of benchmarks, so there are many other benchmarks. For example, the machine, the math-based benchmarks. There are also PhD level GPQA. So more details about the GPQA Diamond benchmark. And then there are other exams they also compared with. There is also MMLU benchmark, right? MMLU basically consists of 57 different tasks. 7 of them are actually shown here, but out of those 57 tasks, GPT-4o1 is better than GPT-4o on 54 tasks. Okay. So, and clearly you can see in this diagram that compared to GPT-4o, O1 basically shows improvement everywhere, and sometimes pretty significant improvement compared to GPT-4o, right? Which by itself, by the way, was the state of the art until September when this GPT-O1 model came up. Now, how does O1 perform on safety benchmarks and codings? A little bit more detail, essentially. So The idea is that, as I mentioned in the previous slide, they basically did reinforcement learning to improve on this chain of thought thing. And chain of thought thing is basically the reasoning aspect of the model, right? So they use reinforcement learning to hone its chain of thought and define its strategies. In fact, the model learns how to recognize and correct its mistakes. It learns to break down tricky steps into smaller ones, simpler ones, right? It learns to also try different approaches when the current one is not working. So it's basically trying to solve problems in a more human-like manner, while of course leveraging its huge pre-trained parametric memory, right? So that's that. Um, so on the AIME, the Math Olympiad qualifier exam that I talked about on the previous slide, right? If you basically just give it one sample, it was able to score 74%. If you give it 64 samples, 83%. In fact, they did a further experiment. With 1,000 samples, it could actually obtain even 93% scores, which is really huge. GPT-O1 actually also has good vision capabilities. It scores 78.2% on MMAU, which basically is basically the first model on MMAU. This is the very, very complicated complex data set. On this one is the first model to be competitive with human experts. OpenAI folks also trained the model further on coding data, on programming related data to improve coding skills, and that's called O1 IOI model. It's not publicly available. Basically, they trained it to compete in the International Olympiad on informatics, right? Essentially, yes, if you give it like several chances, it was able to beat the gold medalist there, several in the sense 10,000 samples, and you essentially do consensus and so on, right? But with single sample, it did not perform that well on International Olympiad for informatics. But the great part is that if you basically take the same model and you essentially make it work on the same Codeforces data, which we talked about on the previous slide, this data set, right? This 89% essentially here sort of improves to 93 percentile. And essentially, there's a 93 percentile, which basically means that it is in the top 7% of competitors on this Codeforces website. Okay. Now, as I mentioned earlier as well, OpenAI basically has stopped giving out the chain of thought that the model uses to come up with the final solution. It gives the final solution, of course, as well as it gives a model-generated summary of the chain of thought for O1 preview. OpenAI may actually stop giving this model-generated summary as well later. Who knows, right? Now, if you basically showed the outputs from O1 preview versus GPT-4o to a human and ask them, hey, which one basically is preferred? Of course, humans also prefer GPT-4o model for most tasks. However, for some tasks like personal writing, they did observe that GPT-4o is somewhat preferred compared to O1. So not all tasks O1 is best, but for most tasks, it's actually better than GPT-4o. Right? They also did some safety evaluations. So for example, the standard evaluation of finding percentage of safe completions on harmful prompts. It's sort of, I sort of find GPT-4o and O1 preview almost comparable. Yeah, O1 preview is slightly better on many of them, but so the idea is that O1 preview is better or equivalent compared to GPT-4o on various safety benchmarks. Okay. Now, lastly, how good is O1 in persuading people? So essentially, persuading is an interesting safety task. So where the idea is that, can I, argue with you and persuade you to have a different point of view or make you pay for something or make you say something and so on. So they did perform 4 different types of evaluations. So change my view evaluation is argumentative reasoning. So how effective is the AI model in terms of, persuading or rebutting an existing argument to come up with a novel point of view, right? And change the point of view of the original reader, right? They did it with Reddit. So they actually performed this task by actually, working on Reddit thread. Political persuasion. So how can I change your political point of views? Make me pay. So, persuade you to pay for something in a simulated game. Make me say something. So persuade you to say a specific keyword in a simulated game. Okay. What they observed is GPT-4o, O1 preview, O1 mini. So O1 mini is basically, a simpler version or a diluted version of O1 preview, although it's good at coding. Okay. So they observed that all of these models basically are about 70 to 80 percentile of humans, which means that compared to, so if you basically look at a typical Reddit thread where people are trying to persuade, the original poster for something. GPT-4o scores is better than 70 to 80% of people. GPT-4o's response is more persistent than 70 to 80% of people. However, it is not superhuman, so it's not as good as, let's say, the top 5 percentile of persuasive people. Okay, so that's that. Now, lastly, let me talk about how good is GPT-4o in terms of multilingual performance. So to measure that, these folks basically translated the MMLU benchmark dataset across these many languages, about 14 languages, I think, right? Manually translated them. So this is all human professional translations. And here are the comparisons. So you can observe that compared to GPT-4o, O1 preview basically gives you way better results across all of these languages. So you can basically see there are some Indian languages as well, Hindi and I think Bengali and maybe those two, right? And of course there are other languages like Chinese, CJK. So CJK, all three of them are there. There's also European languages, Spanish, and French and Italian. And there are others like Yoruba and Portuguese, Indonesian, and so on. And you observe that on all of those, basically on the popular MMLU benchmark data set, you observe better results with O1 preview. Okay. So in summary, in this video, I talked about GPT-O1, right? And of course, it establishes state of the art on several benchmarks. It basically uses reinforcement learning for chain of thought, and it generates very long chain of thought, although those chain of thoughts reasoning chains are not publicly available. Only a summary is made publicly available by OpenAI API, right? And the API basically exposes O1 preview and O1 mini publicly. Okay. So that's it for this video. Hope you liked the video. Thank you for watching. Connect with me on my LinkedIn or look at my research on my homepage. Thank you.